Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to another pod shoot. Today, my guest is Larry Johnson, and we're going to be talking about the early days of whatever glimpses we're getting of the how Trump will approach foreign policy, and clearly it'll be materially different than how the Biden administration did foreign policy, and it seems like it'll be even materially different than the first Trump administration did foreign policy. Larry, what are the observations that you've gleaned from this, short tenure so far of the Trump administration?
Do you remember those video clips of Trump when he appeared at the Vince McMahon World Wrestling Federation event and, was breaking chairs over people's heads and stuff? That's what we're seeing. We're seeing the political equivalent of that. It's a combination of showmanship, but unlike, as you correctly noted, his first term in 2017. He showed up to work this time knowing what he wanted to do and came prepared to do it. In 2017, I think he was surprised that he won, and happy but surprised and naive. He assumed that, I'm president now, everybody will fall in line, they'll respect me, and didn't realize what the nature of the deep state was, which he came to discover during the ensuing 4 years. And then the message really got delivered to him during his 4 year hiatus when the entire Department of Justice, FBI, law enforcement in general was unleashed on him. And frankly, I think I'm not sure how many other people would have been able to withstand the kinds of attacks that were directed at him. So he came ready and prepared this time with a vision of what he wanted to do. Frankly, I did not even consider or think that he had tried to take out USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. And, I hadn't even really looked at it, but when I looked yesterday, I was shocked by a couple of things. That it was set up by John Fitzgerald Kennedy in early 1961 by executive order. It was supposed to be helping us counter communism by promoting development in what we now call the global South and then was called the Third World. But in 1990, the budget for the place was like $7.7 billion. In the year 2000, $7.5 billion. Then under George W. Bush, it took off a little bit. It got almost double the budget, up to $12 billion. Then when Barack Obama came into office, it was boosted to $14 billion. But in 2019, then this is curious, while Trump was president, the budget of that place got just exploded. It went up to almost $42 billion. And the money, I understand a significant flow of the money prior to 2019 was from the Clinton Foundation, or the Clinton Foundation channeling money into their foundation. It became a grift operation. It also became something that the CIA was using as an unclassified covert action, if you can imagine such a thing. They were using funding groups that would be used in color revolutions to field protesters, put protesters in the streets. So Trump needs to answer a question like, what were you even aware? I suspect he wasn't even aware. I'd like to know who did it, but during the first Trump administration. But that's where the USAID just went completely out of control. Well, now Trump is reining that in, and then the World Wrestling Federation, the cage matches that he played on television, he unleashed it with his initial threat of tariffs against China, Mexico, Canada just the other day. So I've seen someone's already clever enough to print up a T-shirt saying, I survived the 24-hour trade war because they, people were saying, oh my God, this is going to unleash inflation and they're going to retaliate and it's going to be ugly. But in less than 24 hours, President Sheinbaum of Mexico, had a good conversation with Trump, agreed to dispatch 10,000 troops to the border, and to take immediate steps to arrest cartel members and try to cut off the flow of fentanyl. Ditto for Canada. Trump is scheduled, I think, today to talk to China. May have already talked to Xi Jinping. But from Trump's standpoint, what this was a fulfillment of his promise to go after the fentanyl, which is killing upwards of 70,000 people a year. I mean, I've had in my own family, in my own house, I had a nephew who died of a fentanyl overdose. He's 38 years old, killed him. So Trump, it was, this wasn't about trade. This is about getting control of the border, shutting down the flow of illegal immigrants, and the flow of fentanyl. So, in some aspects, people are getting exhausted. I think he's made he's making some stumbles. The issue of the Panama Canal that's come up is remarkable. It's simply because, he's now discovered, oh my God, there's Chinese. He's like the police inspector in the movie Casablanca. Gambling in the casino? How could that be? The Chinese have been running the ports, the container ports, at the either end of the Panama Canal for 30 years. I mean, this is not new. They were there when Trump was president the first go round. And for the sake of your listeners and viewers, the Panama Canal runs north and south. It doesn't run east and west. And at the north end is the city of Cologne. And in Cologne, there are at least 3 major container ports. So if you see these big cargo ships, which have the 40-foot container boxes, they've got ports with cranes that ought to take those off, stack the containers, and then they are unloaded in the stores of merchants that populate what's called the Cologne Free Trade Zone. A similar thing happens at the southern end of the Panama Canal. Well, the Chinese that own these are Hong Kong companies, and they had ownership over it even before the Chinese took control of Hong Kong. Nonetheless, Trump's seen this as a way, I think, to try to pressure China. And so the pressuring China in that regard, going after the sanctions, and yet he's not seeking a war with China, just the opposite. And despite, I think, some stumbles early on with him thinking he could threaten Russia, he was making some claims that Russia had suffered massive casualties and its economy was in tatters. But neither of that was true. He was being lied to by the intelligence community. I think this week we've seen him make some changes. And just yesterday, he welcomed the Florida Panthers, a hockey team based in Coral Spring, Florida. I used to live there for a little bit, to the White House. And at the very start, he says, I think you got this amazing player, Sergei Bobrovsky. And he's a Russian. And he was a goalie, and Trump just started talking him up and praising him for being an outstanding goalie, and then walked over to shake his hand. Now, I think most people just viewed that as, it's just Trump being Trump. It's an event. That to me showed some sophistication on Trump's part, because he was sending a subtle but a clear message to Vladimir Putin and to the Russians that you're not our enemy. And I'm going to sit here and instead of tell you about all the terrible things Russia is or Russia's doing, I'm celebrating one of your sons for being an outstanding hockey player. So the point of all this is, I think, that Trump has a vision of what he's wanting to accomplish. And I think all the Trump critics are so seized with the hatred of him that they're incapable of understanding that, yeah, he may do some amazing, surprising things in this term.
Yeah, I've spoken to some people, and I think that given some of the things I've seen so far from the administration, that I think this administration, I think, might be a tremendously successful administration or a tremendously failed administration.
Yes, yeah,
So
I fully agree.
he's making a lot of high risk moves. If they pay off, it'll produce amazing results. If they don't pay off, then I think it'll have really horrible results. So and also with respect to how we get information, whenever you read, like the American version of what happened in the conversation with Scheinbaum, and the American version of what happened with the conversation with Trudeau, if you see the Canadian version and the Mexican version, they're different.
Right.
As you recall from the Cuban Missile Crisis, one of the main objectives, one of the main reasons Russians put missiles in Cuba was because of U.S. missiles in Turkey.
Right.
And what happened? So everybody declared, JFK, and he did, and I think he did handle the crisis well. But everybody said, so Russia, with much fanfare, removed their missiles from Cuba, and then 6 months later, very quietly, we removed all our missiles from Turkey. So ultimately, Russia was not interested in having missiles in Cuba. They were interested in having missiles no longer in Turkey. So, so it seemed like Russia accomplished, what it wanted to accomplish. In Mexico here, what they're touting is, for the first time, the administration says it's going to start going after the weapons that come into Mexico. So Trump did not tweet that, put it on Truth Social, but in Mexico, it's been pretty prevalent of the fact that he's made obligations. So it's not like Mexico caved. It's like they each gave something of value to, to the other party. So and they're each testing the other party. We have this 30-day period of time, and it not be just an issue of. I'm sure it's convenient for Trump to tell the American public, this is the 30 days for me to decide what I want, but it's also 30 days for the Mexicans to decide whether, the U.S. will be in compliance with the obligations that the U.S. said it would take upon, and clearly it would be much easier for the Mexican government to deal with the cartels if the U.S. could prevent the cartels from getting money. So, getting arms and also really getting money.
That's the key. That's the
cartel, key. What I tell people is, who funds the cartel? America funds the cartel.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the value, the most of the revenues the cartel gets are revenues they get in dollars in the United States. So they get in the United States, and they have to bring it back to Mexico. Most of the arms they get are in the United States. So basically, the U.S. American people, through their cravings for drugs, are funding the cartels, and that money is, and then arming the cartels. So it requires a partnership and cooperation, and maybe there'll actually be a partnership and cooperation. I think the thing that many people, and I'm talking to you from Mexico, so I have a lot of knowledge here. And the context I like to provide to people is, the cartels have more money to spend on weapons than the Mexican government does.
Yeah.
So you can't say any gang in the U.S. can outspend the U.S. military. But this is the challenge. This is the challenge that Mexico has, and it's a very difficult fight. When the people you're fighting are better armed than the government itself that's attempting to fight it. They have much more resources. The GDP of the cartels is probably the cartels might generate more revenues than the Mexican government collects in taxes
Yeah,
from the
no,
Mexican people.
yeah,
So
you're
so
you're absolutely right on that.
and so when people make demands of the Mexican government, you have to consider what the circumstances are and how much more difficult it is. When you have those circumstances, the government just doesn't have the resources to take on the cartels, and it's unclear that the U.S. has had the resources. In the past, I don't know if it's still the case, but in one of the trials that was, I don't know, in Chicago or somewhere, when one of the persons who that was extradited to the U.S. From the Sinaloa cartel, I think it was, had a document from the U.S. government that was a cooperation agreement between the U.S. government and the Sinaloa cartel.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we don't even know how much the U.S. government is really cooperating with, who was deemed the least bad cartel, and how much of Mexican policy is congruent with what U.S. would like Mexican policy to be, which is basically limit violence and and cooperate with the least bad of the cartels.
Well, and in fact, Trump has really he set now a different tone. So I'll say I've been on the periphery of the drug wars for well over 25 years. When we set up my company, Berg Associates, uh, one of the other founding partners was Robert Nieves, Bobby Nieves. Bobby had been chief of international operations for DEA. He's the one that came up with what was known as the Kingpin program, and was also instrumental in setting up what was called the Special Operations Division. Another founding member was Morris Busby, Ambassador Morris Busby. Buzz was the ambassador in Colombia going after Pablo Escobar, and when they killed Pablo on top of the roof. If anybody's seen the Netflix series Narcos, the Ambassador Crosby, that's Buzz.
Mhm.
But my other business partner, John Moynihan, he ran New York City's undercover money laundering operations for 4 years. He's really a certifiable genius in this. John actually played a critical role in getting the current director of the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, that Trump had a hiccup. He appointed some sheriff from Hillsborough County, and then that guy had to withdraw. But he's finally named Derek Maltz. Derek Maltz is in the entire history of DEA, and so we're going back 50 plus years. This is the first time DEA has been headed up by an actual agent, a DEA agent who worked in the field and ran operations. And in the past, they were political appointees who really didn't know anything about it. I think what you're going to see now, because I know for a fact that Derek understands that you got to go after the money. In my own small consulting firm, back in 2015, we went to the government of Mexico with a proposal to conduct a racketeering case, a civil RICO case, against Wachovia Bank, because Wachovia Bank had been involved with laundering like $800 billion. The Mexican government initially signed up with us, but then a fellow named Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General under Barack Obama,
Mhm.
threatened the government of Mexico that if they proceeded with that lawsuit against Wachovia Bank, they'd be in trouble. So this is one more example of Obama and his administration facilitating drug traffickers. They directly interfered in that case. We've, in the course of my consulting business, apart from working with the U.S. military, we did a lot of undercover investigations, product counterfeiting investigations, and the number of major U.S. corporations that are taking money knowingly not unwittingly, but knowingly taking money from drug traffickers and drug cartels and facilitating their economic growth is astonishing. So that's where you cut out the money. You don't have to send in the military to kill cartel members. You know, you kill them, there are going to be more that'll rise up. Take their money, all of a sudden, it's like depriving somebody of oxygen.
And their money's in the U.S.
Oh, yes, very much so.
So you agree with my observation that really, without significant participation of the U.S., really there's not much Mexico can do on its own to be
right. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely.
And that type of assistance that should come from the U.S. side has not been very forthcoming.
Oh no,
for a long period of time.
Let me give you one example. I mean, I worked on this directly. I was consulting for a bank in Panama, and they were providing an e-commerce to two guys. One was a Spaniard, and one was a Ukrainian, and they had a business. And good Lord, this is 8 years ago. They were selling soap online. Okay, you go to a website and say, I want some soap. So I started checking it out, and I got a list. I got a list of sales that they had submitted to the bank, and I started looking at it. And I didn't. What I should have done was look immediately at the credit card numbers, because what I would have seen is that they were all debit cards. It took me a little while to figure that out, and I finally focused on that. But I started calling the people, and I mean, these were real names, real addresses, real phone numbers, real people. And I started calling them, pretending that I was the customer service rep for the soap company, just to say, hey, did you get your product? Wanted to make sure you're satisfied. Every one of them was, what? Soap? I haven't bought any soap. What are you talking about? Well, what we figured out was the drug traffickers had gone to this. It's called the International Bank. It's a bank that's based in Texas, subsidiary of Banamex. And it's located right along the Texas border, from Matamoros or Brownsville, all the way across Texas. What had happened is these drug traffickers had gone to the bank. They had bought all these debit cards, and they paid a premium to the bank, but the bank was able to issue the debit cards because the drug traffickers showed up with information they got from the black market of stolen identities. It had people's names, social security numbers, phone numbers, addresses. So they had, quote, legitimate customers. And so that money, they would run the debit cards because they'd already put their drug money in the bank by virtue of buying those debit cards. That money was then transferred to Panama. And then from Panama, it was wired to a bank in Cyprus, and then woof, disappeared. So, once I unraveled that, I told the bank, I threw the penalty flag and said, hey, you got a money laundering operation going on here, and they killed it. But it's one example of how friggin' clever these people are. I mean, they're not stupid. They are extremely smart, and when it comes to money, boy, they know how to move it, make it, and protect it.
Yeah. Apparently, in the election when Peña Nieto won, there was a bunch of news stories here about the distributions of all these, as you mentioned, these debit cards, small quantities to all these people. Most likely they were buying votes. And the curious thing about this is the bank that issued these debit cards apparently did no due diligence on the account, because when they traced the account, they traced it to the company didn't exist and the address didn't exist. And normally Mexican banks, to open up an account, are very diligent on all the documentation that you need. And the regulators are normally very diligent. So this was, very, very interesting. I tell you that one of the after the crisis in Mexico in uh, in the mid '90s, two major financial institutions in the U.S. had a partnership, and they bought some collection rights to loans from banks that the government had intervened in, and so they thought very simple. We bought these collection rights. We paid a certain amount of money for these collection rights. We're just gonna go to all the borrowers and say, pay us 10, 15 cents on the dollar. They'll pay it, and they'll make a nice return, settling all these loans. And they thought it would be very simple.
Yeah.
So they had also a restriction placed upon them that they had to use the lawyers that the government had assigned to do the collections of these of these loans. So they had to manage the lawyers that the government had already put in place, to manage the legal process, which in enforcing the claims that that the bank had. So they were having no success. So one of the people involved in this transaction knew me. He called me up and he said, Jeff, will you, help us out on this? And so we had negotiated an economic arrangements, subject to my doing more due diligence on the situation. So and one of the things I did for due diligence, I said, you can't change the lawyers, but as I'm reading the document that you signed, with the banking commission on what your rights are, there's nothing prohibited you from going and giving somebody powers to check the loan files. The files on the courts, so you could see what the lawyers are actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, "Are you sure I can do it?" I said, "There's no prohibition. Will the government like that you did this? No. Is there anything in the document that says, you can't do this? No. I think they would think that you probably would rely upon people you hire as general counsel to manage the lawyers well, and and that would be sufficient." So so they gave me authorization. I chose my lawyer there to go in and check the loan files of their 20 largest loans. Then I told them to contact the lawyers who were handling this, that were handpicked by the top people at the Banking Commission.
Mm-hmm.
The very top people at the Banking Commission chose these team of lawyers to manage the collection process. And then I said, "You're going to present me as I'm just this, gringo from the U.S. coming in, just wanting to shake hands and, touch some flesh, with the team. So make it sound like I have no idea what I'm talking about. This is just all perfunctory." So I had for every loan, I had the details of exactly what was the status of the legal work that had been done and all the legal filings. So I go to the lawyer. Hi, I'm here. Nice to meet you. Can you just give me a quick recap of, these are our biggest loans. Can you just give me a big recap of, where we are on this and what you expect to happen and what actions are you taking now? So they gave me, a nice recap. They all spoke pretty decent English. They were all smiling, very nice, very polite. They gave me a recap, and then I went back to the people that had bought the collection rights, and I said, every one of your lawyers lied about the status of every single one of the of the filings there. I think people, don't have an appreciation of how these countries, how difficult it is, to follow a rule of law, process. And sometimes the government's involved, and a lot of times the government is not involved because it just really can't, stop these activities. So that's why I think that if anything's going to be accomplished in this drug problem, the U.S. will have to be a serious partner in this process, as opposed to just threatening Mexico and saying, we need you to do all this stuff, because even if they wanted to, the capacity doesn't exist to be able to do it. So, I mean, they can't go into the United States and follow the money in the United States, and they can't do anything about, the arms that are sold in the United States that, that come into Mexico. And, and they also have, we have problems controlling our border. They have problems controlling entry into Mexico, like we have problems controlling entry into the United States. So I think, so when people like to hear, gee, I was in a negotiation, I got everything I wanted, but the reality is things are a lot more complex. These are probably, trade, the United States, as frequently when it gets countries to do. I mean, think about like what we did, for the Camp David Accords that got peace between, Egypt and Israel. How much money did we promise both parties in order for them to sign that agreement? I mean, so we basically bribe people to do what we want them to do. It's not some of it is us putting pressure on people, but a lot of it is us writing checks to people. In doing so. Even like when I saw a post on, the guy in Panama, and what did he say? The guy in Panama said, when the contract expires, I'm gonna get out of it, which is in 2027. I'm gonna look to get out of it early. I'm not going to commit myself to Belt and Road anymore. And by the way, Marco Rubio was a very nice guy. I gave him a list of a whole bunch of infrastructure projects that he said the United States would be willing to finance. So the question is, in 2027, the Panama will probably take a look at it and say, did the U.S. write the checks for the infrastructure projects that it said would write the checks on, and in return then, maybe they'll kick out the Chinese, or maybe they won't, depending upon what's best for them, in 2027.
Yeah. Well, that's a curious thing about, again, getting all exercised over Panama, because those Chinese companies have come in, they built massive infrastructure at those ports for handling the containers. They've got these big cranes. If the Chinese are out, the Chinese say, okay, we'll take our cranes and go home. Well, the United States, in my judgment, is not in a position, is not ready, doesn't have the capability to go down there and install new ports with all the cranes and such to handle that container traffic. And people don't understand the enormous volume of material that flows through the Panama Canal, and is just, the Cologne Free Trade Zone is it used to be, it was the second largest free trade zone in the world. I think now it may be third largest, but it's huge. Another one has grown up in Dubai, that is probably number 2, but the number 1 still remains Hong Kong. The volume of money that flows through there is not captured by traditional economic statistics. And so, we get the World Bank numbers and the IMF numbers and U.S. Treasury about, our GDP is X amount. And even the Fed, we got so many dollars. I guarantee you, they have no idea. I did this is 25 years ago, but there was this, in the Cologne Free Trade Zone, it's the traditional merchant groups. So, the rug merchants of the Middle East. And you have a group of Lebanese Jews, a group of Lebanese Muslims. Those are the two sort of dominant merchant classes in the Cologne Free Trade Zone. Then you've got the Sindhis, who are Muslims out of Western India, Eastern Pakistan. Then you have a few Chinese, and then the minority is actually genuine Latinos. Anyway, we had this one fellow, he's got to be dead now. I'll use his name, Jose Menehed. And he had this little business called El Triunfo. And when these guys would ship, sometimes they wouldn't have enough to fill up a container, so they'd get with 2 or 3 other merchants, load their goods into that container, and ship it overseas. Well, one of those containers got picked up with a quantity of cocaine, and so DEA was going to pull Jose's visa to the United States. Now, Jose at the time, he was into his 60s. He was a very portly gentleman. I called him a watermelon with feet. And he had his cardiologist in New York City. And he was scared to death that, oh my God, I'm going to lose my visa and I can't see my cardiologist. So he said, what do I need to do to keep the visa? And DEA said, let us come in and audit your business. So then DEA turned to, my group, and I went down there with another retired DEA agent, and we did an audit of his business. Now, he had about 3,000 square feet of storefront, and he was selling counterfeit baby clothes, designer baby clothes that was all counterfeit. So, it was, that's how he made his money. He had his 2 sons worked with him. One of the sons we called Fredo, because the kid was, like Fredo and The Godfather. I'm smart, not really. So we were floored when we figured out how much money was moving through this one 3,000 square foot storefront selling just counterfeit baby clothes. $100 million. That's 25 years ago.
Wow.
Now, we're not talking about moving household goods like rice cookers, coffee makers, toasters, toaster ovens, or televisions, and all sorts of electronics, and Under Armour, Nike. The clone-free trade zone is filled with like 3,000 storefronts. Some are quite enormous. There was sort of a funny side story to this, that when we got there, it was like a day before Eid, and we noticed that Menahem was making up these gift baskets, and I asked him. I said, we heard the story that when the United States invaded Panama in December of 1989, that you guys were you were hunkered down with weapons because you were going to fight off the Muslim merchants. And he goes, you crazy? He says, they protected us. He says, they they had machine guns. They were guarding the entrances so the Panamanians wouldn't come in here and steal us blind. He goes, I'm preparing gift bags for my Muslim neighbors. So right there, instead of the chaos we got in the Middle East, you saw that Muslim merchants and Jewish merchants, they were working together. They were competitors, but as far as there was actually a friendship and a cooperation there. So, I think there's actually some lessons to be drawn out of that. But the volume of money that moves in the black and gray market, U.S. officials don't understand. Most government officials don't.
Yeah, I knew. I haven't been in contact with him in a long time, but he once was when I had my company with my risk management model. He was one of my first customers, and at that time he was a CEO of a bank. Previous to that, he actually was president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta for a period of time, and we used to take these nice long hikes together, and he would tell me stories about his time at the Atlanta Fed. And one of the things he pointed out is how much bills in circulation per capita the Atlanta Fed had, as far as paper money circulating, much more so than other banks. And he told me he had built his own model about that as a proxy for how big the drug economy was, because Florida was in the is in the jurisdiction of the Atlanta Fed, and so he told me how much more cash in circulation they had, how many more big bills in circulation they had than any other of the Federal Reserve banks. So he said, if you take a look at all the Federal Reserve banks and you see how much cash, how much cash is in circulation per person, and then you see how many large bills there are per person, it's an order of magnitude higher in the Atlanta Fed versus anyone else. So he just used that proxy, and he would make the argument is that, that really it is the drug economy is larger than any estimates he says, just by simply analyzing the difference between all these bills that are in circulation and this how much more per capita and how and how many big bills were in circulation. So
yeah. Well, that I think that this is one of those unstated goals of Trump. He's genuinely going to go after the drug. He recognizes how destructive the illegal narcotics trade is to the United States, and he's not confronting it directly, but he's going after it hard, and that's tied up with what he did, his first effort with China, Mexico, and Canada. That's really what was behind this, the drugs, because the Chinese, they're in bed, or Chinese criminal gangs, let's be precise, are in bed with the Mexican and Colombian cartels. A buddy of mine who's a FedEx pilot was reported to me, a few years back, that last time he was in Hong Kong, I went to this one bar, and all the bar girls were Colombians. So they're trafficking women from, Colombia all the way over to Hong Kong, it's pervasive. So Trump's going after that hard, and I don't think it's going to be a shock. The law enforcement side of this also has been, they've never really gone after the money. They've been terrible about that, and that's why I come back to this Derek Maltz, now head of DEA. They're going to go after the money. This is going to be the first time, really, in 50 years, that you're going to see DEA going after money and the financial resources of these cartels in a way that's never been done.
Yeah, years ago, somebody told me, and I don't know if this person worked for the FBI or what organization. This is quite a while ago. Told me that one of the problems and why the U.S. didn't really want to fight aggressively the flow of drugs into the United States is that they noticed that whenever there were major busts where they would take a lot of drugs out of circulation, off the market, that demand for drugs is pretty price insensitive. And so when there's limited supply, the prices go up a lot. And so those that have their addictions and their cravings, that basically they found that every time there was a big interdiction of a large quantity of drugs in that market, crime went up a lot because people were increasing crimes. So then the question is, you balance off, if you're stopping drug if you're impeding the trafficking of drugs so that you're limiting supply, are you prepared to deal with the increase in crime that is a consequence of that? And I don't know if that relationship still is true. I know somebody told me who was an official that was true years ago. I don't know if that's currently, it's still the same thing, that if there's major disruptions in supply, that you see a big increase in crime. If that's still the case?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah. And then, but the other thing we've got is the legalization push, the notion that, hey, if we just legalize drugs, all this problems will go away and the cartels will be crippled. It's just the opposite. Once you legalize it, the cartels move into the legalized side of the business, because now they can make the money without fear of getting arrested, and yet they'll still maintain the black market activity. So, but I think what Trump is not just paying lip service. I mean, he's serious about this, but what he did with the tariffs the other day is an example of distraction, like a magician. people are focused on it thinking, oh, this is about an economic trade war. No, this is actually about curtailing and going after the drug traffickers, and without announcing it as, hey, we're going after the drug traffickers. It'll take them a while to figure it out. It's also, Trump has been he sends the real mixed signals, like with respect to Israel. There is the presumption that because he surrounded himself with what are a lot of Christian Zionists, let's the Gentiles who, they're not Jewish, but they fully embrace and believe that Israel was given to the Jews by God and that it is theirs and nobody else can have it. He's put, several people with that belief in his administration, including Mike Huckabee as ambassador to Israel, Lee Stefanik, the UN ambassador, Marco Rubio, Michael Waltz. So you think, man, he is going to be basically a waiter for Bibi Netanyahu's dinner. He's going to be, Mr. Netanyahu, what would you like to eat? What can I bring you? But then Trump turns around and names Stephen Witkoff, as his lead negotiator. And again, people I think assumed, well, he's a pretty strong, believed to be a strong supporter of Israel. So, that's one more check mark that's going to help Bibi Netanyahu. But then Trump put out that Truth Social video of Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs is also Jewish, but Jeffrey Sachs was excoriating Bibi Netanyahu, called him, a deep dark, and then made references to his mother's, the parentage and sexual behavior of his mother. All of a sudden, the ceasefire comes into being, and it was the same deal that could have been had 10 months ago, but Trump was the one that made that happen. So instead of being firmly in the pocket of Bibi Netanyahu, it looks like Trump turned the tables. And I was going to ask you, did you know Steve Witkoff from your New York days?
No, I don't know him. But I was with an Israeli friend of mine a few months back, shortly after Trump won. He came to visit me, looking to talk some business, and we talked about. I asked him if he could tell me what his assessment was of what was going on the ground in Gaza and in Lebanon, and then I told him. I said, what I think is, Israel has, if Israel's objective is to, eliminate Hamas, which I think is a stupid objective because it's an unachievable objective.
Yeah.
So, or the price of achieving it, is so high that you're not going to achieve it because it's unacceptable to a civilized world. I said to him, basically, whatever military objectives you have until inauguration day to accomplish them. And whatever you don't accomplish on inauguration day, it'll be too late. So, I think Trump is serious when he says, you got to have the ceasefire done. So he's sending a signal, you got to get this done. So, I think Israel tried to get a lot done, didn't succeed. That's why I thought, the war was stupid to begin with when you set an unachievable objective, and you think about how evil this is. I mean, you get a deal. You could have taken this deal a number of months because, it's been acknowledged that the terms and conditions of the deal have not materially changed or from what Biden had negotiated. Only Biden couldn't get the deal closed. Trump was able to get the deal closed that Biden couldn't get closed. But how many people died unnecessarily during that period of time on both sides, but obviously much worse on the Palestinian side. And the Gazans, went through hell for a longer period of time than they needed to go through hell, because there was a reasonable agreement on these terms, except for Bibi. So Bibi said, except doing a deal like this was basically, acknowledging defeat. According to his own criteria that he himself established, um, so when you set an objective like this, you either got to really think you can accomplish it, or you don't do anything, because all 60,000 over. I think the latest number is over 60,000 people is the latest estimates. I don't know how accurate they are.
Yeah.
But for the sake of argument, let's say it's reasonable. It might not be, but it could be more, could be less. We don't know, but seems to be the best number we have now. You know, died for what?
Yeah.
Nothing.
But
Just and that's excluding all the property destruction, and the toll of the human toll to the survivors.
Right.
So we haven't calculated the economic cost associated with those that have seen their properties destroyed. Kids that have been out of school. I mean, so the human toll, has not been calculated, and for those that are still alive, is horrendous. This was just the very, 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 stupid war. Very stupid war.
Well, and the reputation damage to Israel is incalculable as a result of this. They haven't boosted their support in the world. They've actually become more isolated. But the interesting thing about Trump is Trump has got good. My understanding is, on the one hand, he gets pilloried by the Democrats as being anti-Semitic, and yet Trump has probably better relations with the whole spectrum of people in the Jewish community, from the Haredi, the Hasidic elements, over to the ones who are not religious. And I think deep down he recognizes that Israel has jeopardized its own survival, and he wants to do what he can to help preserve it. But I think one of the rabbits he's going to pull out of his hat is he's going to open negotiations with Iran, and he's going to get a peace deal with Iran, and a peace deal that will at least eliminate Israel's claim that Iran's building a nuclear weapon to take out Israel. And I think that threat will go away if Trump pulls that off, and I believe that that's one of the things he's tasked Witkoff with as well. It will. I mean, it'll be remarkable. It'll be historic. We really, he would have set himself apart as a president if he pulls that off.
Yeah, that's a deal that needs to happen and should happen. And why I say it needs to happen and should happen, besides with Israel, the Iranian people in the whole region outside of Israelis are the most pro-American population. I mean, right. So we have good relationships with the Saudis and in a lot of other countries, but that doesn't mean the people in the street are necessarily pro-American. The most pro-American population in the whole region are the Iranians.
Right.
So so the people there are sympathetic to Americans, and so it's not like we have. A country ruled by a royal family, that are making deals that really their population is not really thrilled about, but they are pretty effective at controlling the population. A deal that Iran makes with the U.S. would be very welcome by the Iranian people. Yeah.
But the overall assessment of Trump and the foreign policy is, and you're seeing it from a lot of the Democrat critics, they're exhausted. They can't believe the pace of his activity and the variety of attacks. I think you're going to see probably today, unrelated to foreign policy, but he'll issue a new executive order closing the Department of Education. No more need for that. And he's already shut down with the U.S. Agency for International Development. So this is going to some real substantive components of the government that have been arms of the Democrat Party and been used routinely to attack Republicans. he's not playing around. So this is, he has launched a blitzkrieg on so many fronts that his opponents now they're reeling. They don't know where to mobilize forces to try to stop him.
The thing, I want to see a smaller government. I want to see the government having a much smaller footprint. I'd like to see. I'm sympathetic when you have, Elon Musk running in and looking at the payments to, to see to basically do a forensic analysis of how much corrupt the measures are. But while I'm sympathetic to that, I'm not sympathetic to somebody who has tremendous conflicts of interest gathering all this information. Somebody who was investigating one of his corporate entities got fired. I mean, that's just a bad look.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
It's not only a matter of doing the right thing. You got to do the right thing the right way. You got to. You can't say I'm a rule of people. I'm personally very offended. When somebody says, well, somebody crossed the border and they did it illegally, well, I can sit back and say firing inspector generals, at midnight, there's a very specific law about a procedure about how you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to have the inspector generals are supposed to be not apolitical, non-political, and the government has specified a procedure for getting rid of them. You have to give at least 30 days notice, and you have to provide a substantive rationale so Congress could evaluate whether they are in agreement with that rationale when you eliminate an inspector general. And Trump didn't do that, so he flouted the law. If you flout the law, why doesn't everybody else have the right to flout the law?
Right.
So so these type of things, I don't want a private individual who's not burdened by conflict of interest obligations and things like that, taking over entities that that are funded by even like the TikTok. With the TikTok, he could have called Johnson and said, you Congress, you passed a law, please pass another law extending the deadline. Instead, he just said, by executive order, I'm ignoring the law and I'm ignoring the Supreme Court ruling.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to really establish, because we like what he did, do we want to establish a precedent that every president can break the law just because you like the outcome of what they're doing? Then why even have law? Okay. There was no law. So, people might say, gee, I'd like to see, TikTok, stay. I'm happy on it and I want to have a deal, and he's a master deal maker and he'll get a deal done. But that's not the point. The point of it is Congress passed a law. The Supreme Court validated that law. And he basically said, I'm ignoring that through executive order. I'm ignoring an act of the legislature and an act of so I can eliminate whatever the two other branches of government does through executive order. And the Constitution doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So Musk going in and getting and giving instructions so that people who work at USAID, can't enter their workplace because doggy people are in there. No. I mean, I want to see USAID shut down, but I want to shut down the right way. I mean, the right way is, if they're going to make it part of this, if they make it part of the State Department, they go to Congress, they say we want to roll USAID into the State Department. And after they roll it into the State Department, if Rubio wants to hire somebody to do a forensic audit of it, you do it by the rule of law process.
Yeah.
So we have something. What do they say in front of the Supreme Court? What's the saying in front of the Supreme Court?
Equal justice
under the law. Yes.
Yeah.
For everyone. Okay. Yeah. So so he has done this blitzkrieg. And he has the Democrats on the defensive, and there is a lot of sympathy for the things that he's doing because people the country thinks the whole system is broke and wants it fixed. But the question is, what's the price of fixing it? Do we lose our soul in the process? Do we set a precedent, that one day somebody, I spoke with a friend yesterday on my podcast, and I said, what if in 2028, somebody runs again, and they do the same thing with executive orders, on the other side. And what if the person they appoint and give all the authority that Trump has given to Musk? What if this person has given all that authority to George Soros?
Yeah.
Would people be happy?
Yeah.
You think they would say, no, it's fine, whatever? No, there'd be all these lawsuits filed as well to stop them, and they'd be all citing the Constitution to do that, which they're not citing today. Which basically, the arguments that I make is that what I think what makes United States great is the system that our founders designed, and which was meant to be a small, limited government, and that's the source of American greatness. And I'd like us to return to that, and I'd like us to return to it, consistent with rule of law processes, not through executive fiat.
Yeah.
So
I agree entirely with you.
So I don't want to see the executive fiat. A lot of the things I see he's doing, I like.
Yeah.
I just don't like the way it's done.
Yeah. Do them the right way. Do them the right way.
Yes.
That's the key.
Yes. What do you think is likely going to happen with? I guess he's supposed to speak with Xi today. I think I read, and I guess they're also planning some summit meeting with Russia. What do you think the outcome of these conversations will be?
Well, he has no leverage with Russia. Russia holds all the cards. I think Trump was approaching this like in his mind. He thought he was doing a real estate deal with Vladimir Putin, and that Putin owned a casino that was in significant debt, losing money, and he didn't have the cash flow to keep it operating. So Trump thought, hey, I can come in there and I can tell him what to do, make an offer, and he's going to have to accept it. Vladimir Putin's flush with cash. The casino's not in debt; it's making money, and Trump doesn't have anything to offer to make the casino better. So Trump, I think, has started to come to that realization that he's not in the driver's seat with Putin. He's not doing a real estate deal. He's more like trying to propose a marriage relationship with Putin. There's got to be some romance involved, because right now Russia is they're going to destroy Ukraine. And they've got no incentive to stop, because what they see is that the West is simply wanting to use a ceasefire in place as a means to continue the war. There's also, I think, the false assumption that they can split China from Russia. One of the things that Joe Biden accomplished over the last 4 years is he brought a unity between Russia and China that is without precedent in history. And they are now joined at the hip, because they've recognized we either hang together or we will hang separately. And so to that extent, China still pursues its interests, but, and the big but there is, it's cooperating with Russia because it recognizes that China has vulnerabilities, that Russia has vulnerabilities, and that together they're going to stand up against the West. And Trump, I think that's going to be, the world has changed since Donald Trump was last in office, and that's what I don't think he understands.
Yeah, my question is, if you're sitting in the Oval Office advising Trump, how much are you concerned about, if Trump goes and says, I want to follow the Bill McKinley model of having, tariffs and an expansionist nation, where I want Greenland, I want the Panama Canal, because
Yeah.
I'm looking at expanding the sphere of influence of U.S. hegemony, over, this continent and surrounding areas that I think are important. Then what does Trump tell Xi when he says, "I'm going into Taiwan"?
Yeah, exactly.
Not only am I going into Taiwan, I'm going into Japan and South Korea as well. I want to be a regional hegemon just like you. So and so basically you're saying might makes right. So the question is do you want to go toe to toe with me? Or I let you do what you do in your area of influence, and you do, and they do it in partnership with Russia, where Russia maybe would look to, expand a little more beyond its borders, not necessarily reconstitute the Soviet, Union, but at least put itself in a geopolitically stronger stance to go after. How do you sit back and say, I'm really not your enemy, I'm your friend,
Yeah.
when I'm going out to expand the country, where I'm looking to kick China out of the ports, so now maybe one day I can stop Chinese ships from passing through the Panama Canal. So if you're Mr. Xi and you're Putin and you're seeing him with these desires, what do you think when you sit at the table and he says, I want us to be friends? How credible is that statement?
Yeah, well, it's not credible. But on the other hand, let's take each of the cases real quick. Canada. He wants to make Canada the 51st state, and you're going, are you kidding me? You want to give the Democrats 2 more guaranteed Senate seats? You want to bring in representatives into the House of Representatives who are more likely to favor the Democrats than Republicans? Are you crazy? That's not going to happen. With respect to Greenland, we've already got a military presence on the ground there, and he's talking about wanting to keep the maritime routes open. Okay, to do that, you need icebreakers. The United States has one functioning icebreaker, and then the next one's not due to roll off the production line for another 2 years. Whereas Russia's got like something, on the order of 40 to 50, with at least 7 of them being nuclear powered. So we're not even in a position that to compete to keep that open. So again, it's one of those things where the rhetoric does not match the reality. And the Panama, great. Take on the task of running the canal. I don't think the United States could do it. We're not technologically what we used to be, and yet, we're like that storied high school athlete who was the star linebacker. 40 years later is, fat, overweight, smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and finishes off a bottle of scotch every night. Not the same athlete. That's sort of, I think, the state the United States is in right now.
So how do we rebuild that?
Step by step. Just like this is the lesson I think that comes out of Russia and Vladimir Putin, that you start by investing at home. Russia was in complete collapse. I've got friends who were one worked for a law firm in Moscow back in 1999, and he said, and he was being as descriptive as he could be. He said Moscow at the time was a genuine shithole. It was dirty. It didn't work. The infrastructure was crumbling. It was, across the board. Well, man, now you go to Moscow today. Paris used to be known as the City of Lights. No longer. That's Moscow. Moscow is the City of Lights. It's lit up in ways that, particularly around Christmas time, they're just spectacular. But what Putin did from once he took power in 99, instead of wasting money on fruitless foreign military adventures, they invested it in Russia. They built up infrastructure. The subway systems they're like art galleries. They're incredible. They're safe. You're not seeing rats running around or people relieving themselves of bodily functions on the platforms. There's order, but there's also a freedom that comes with it. that we don't enjoy right now in the United States. However, I did see a video this morning, and I'm gonna have to jump here in about 5 minutes, but it showed a guy filming a part of New York City, and he says, 2 weeks ago these sidewalks are jammed with illegals selling counterfeit merchandise. He says Trump comes in and starts the ICE crackdown. In 2 weeks, he says it's all gone. The streets, he says, the streets already feel safer. So that's the kind of thing where you start enforcing the law, you start holding people accountable, and you start investing the money here instead of wasting it overseas. That I think is the start of the road back, and maybe that was what Trump has in mind. I hope so.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that that's the case, and I hope he executes well, and hopefully he will execute. It's respect for the fact that we have three branches of government, not just one branch, and we should do things well and do things right.
Wise words on your part.
So you have to go. So I always like to give my guest the last word. So and it's always a pleasure to see you and speak with you, Larry. So how would you like to wrap up this podcast?
No, just to thank you for being. Again, you don't just talk it, you walk it. You believe in free speech. You believe in the Constitution. You believe in the rule of law, and by what you do in your life, and by putting BitChute out there, you're showing people the example by what you do. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much. That's very kind words, Larry, and you have a great day.
All right, Jeff. Thanks, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye, Larry.